If we don't shear a sheep, what happens? How do they take care of their wool? This is a question that came from one of our viewers. And you know what? This is actually a really good question. And the answer might surprise you. So today, I want to answer this question and also tell you why so many sheep get really fat when they're not sheared. And this is a show about sheep and other farm animals. So let's answer the question, what would happen if we didn't shear a sheep? Well, first of all, the sheep would probably still shed their wool naturally. In the wild, certain breeds of sheep will shed their wool once a year or every couple of years, usually in the summer when it's hot outside. The reason why is because the wool acts like an insulator and it keeps the sheep warm in the winter. But in the summer, it can make them too hot, so they will shed their wool. There are a lot of different breeds of sheep. Most of the ones that we raise on farms are domesticated, and they are the ones that produce the wool that we use for clothing. But there are also some breeds that are more wild, and those are the ones that are better at taking care of their wool. Domesticated sheep have been selectively bred by humans for thousands of years for their wool. We wanted them to have more wool, thicker wool, and wool that grows longer before we have to shear it. So most domestic sheep don't shed very much at all, even in the summer. So if we don't shear a domesticated sheep, then their wool will just keep growing and growing. And I've heard that some sheep can grow up to 4 or 5 pounds of new wool each year. So that means that after a few years, the sheep will have a huge fleece. Now, I bet you're wondering, how do sheep take care of all that extra wool? Well, one way that they do it is by rubbing against things. You've probably seen sheep rubbing against trees, rocks, or the ground. They do this for a couple of reasons. It helps them get rid of some of their wool, and it also helps them untangle their wool so it doesn't get all twisted up. Rubbing against things is a natural thing that sheep do, so they will do it no matter what. But this won't get rid of all the wool. There's no way for a sheep to get rid of the thick undercoat except by rubbing against something over and over again. And after a while, that gets to be pretty hard on the sheep's skin. Another thing that happens when you don't shear a sheep is that their wool becomes too long, too thick, and too heavy. This makes it hard for them to move around. You've probably seen a sheep tangled in a fence or stuck in a ditch. When sheep are stuck somewhere, it's often because their wool is too thick and they can't move very well. Sheep are happiest when it's cool out, but when their wool is too thick, they can't stay cool. In the summer, they're prone to something called heat stress, which means that they can easily become too hot and it can make them sick. So when a sheep isn't sheared, they have a harder time staying cool in the summer. When a sheep's wool is too thick, it can also make them more likely to get parasites. Some parasites like to lay their eggs in the wool. Then when the wool is really thick, the parasites have a place to hide and they can grow without being bothered by anything. So if a sheep isn't sheared, they can end up with a lot of parasites. And here's another problem. If a sheep has thick wool, it's more likely to get wet when it rains. And when they get wet, they can get cold, and that can make them sick. Now, sheep are pretty smart. They know that when it's about to rain, they should probably go inside where they'll be dry and warm. But sometimes the rain comes suddenly, and there's nothing they can do about it. And if the sheep's wool is too thick, then they're more likely to get wet. Let me tell you a story about a wild sheep in New Zealand. There was a sheep that didn't get sheared. Its wool grew and grew until it was almost twice as heavy as the sheep itself. The wool was so thick and heavy that the sheep couldn't move very well. It was too tired to walk, and so it laid down and it never got up again. And after a while, it died. In New Zealand and Australia, there are wild sheep that have never been sheared by humans. So their wool grows and grows until it's really long and really heavy. And these sheep seem to do okay. They seem to be able to take care of themselves, and they live a long time. But I think that's because there aren't many people in New Zealand and Australia, and so the sheep aren't bothered by people trying to shear them. But if a wild sheep lives near people, then it's likely to be sheared. In fact, in my town, we have a man who goes around shearing wild sheep. He shears them, and then he lets them go back into the wild. I think he shears them because he wants to help the sheep. He probably knows that the sheep would die if they weren't sheared. When a sheep is too woolly, it can also have babies that are too woolly. If a mother sheep isn't sheared, then her lambs probably won't be sheared either. And if the lambs are born in the summer, Their wool will start growing right away. Their wool will grow over their eyes, and they won't be able to see. They'll be stumbling around, trying to find their way. And it'll be hard for them to find their mother's milk. So in the wild, if a ewe isn't sheared, it's unlikely that her babies will survive. Here's one more problem that woolly sheep have. When their wool gets too long, they can't hear very well. This is because the wool covers their ears, and it makes it hard to hear. Now, all of this probably makes you wonder, if it's so bad for sheep to have too much wool, why don't we just shear them more often? Why wait until their wool is really long before we shear them? Well, I think it's because shearing sheep is hard work, and it takes a lot of time. And I think that's why we wait until the sheep are pretty woolly before we shear them. It's easier to shear a sheep when their wool is really long. But some people shear their sheep more often. My friend Benji, he shears his sheep every 2 or 3 months. His sheep are really fluffy and they're really happy. I hope that answered your question. Thanks for watching. Bye.